Deep in the Olympic National Forest, where ancient cedars block out the sun and cell towers can't reach, Chen hammered the final nail into what locals would later call the impossible structure. 3 years ago, she was worth $2.8 billion. 3 years ago, she had a husband, 2 children, and a tech empire that spanned continents. Then the accident happened, the one that killed her family and destroyed everything she'd built. The media called it negligence. The courts called it manslaughter. Sarah called it the end of her world. But what the search and rescue team found last Tuesday wasn't a broken woman living off the grid. Inside her hand-built sanctuary, they discovered laboratories that NASA would envy, computers running code that defied known physics, and prototypes of technology that shouldn't exist for another century. The woman who lost everything had been creating the impossible. But here's what nobody could explain. How was she powering it all? And why were government vehicles now surrounding the forest? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. "That's not supposed to be there," he whispered to his hiking partner Jenny, who was already fumbling for her phone despite knowing the futility of finding signal this deep in the wilderness. The structure emerged from the forest like something from another world. Glass panels caught fragments of filtered sunlight, reflecting them in impossible angles. Steel beams twisted skyward, supporting what appeared to be a crystalline dome that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. The building, if it could be called that, defied every principle of remote construction Marcus knew. How the hell did someone get materials out here? Jenny's voice carried a tremor of unease. The nearest logging road is 12 miles away. They approached cautiously, their boots crunching on pine needles that seemed strangely uniform, as if the very ground had been cultivated. The air hummed with an energy Marcus couldn't identify, not quite electrical, but alive in a way that made his skin prickle. Through a wall of seamless glass, they glimpsed the interior. Banks of monitors displayed cascading data streams. Metallic arms moved with surgical precision over workbenches lined with devices that belonged in science fiction films. And there, at the center of it all, stood a woman with graying hair pulled back severely, her hands dancing across holographic interfaces that materialized and dissolved at her touch. Chen didn't notice them at first. She was lost in her work, manipulating 3-dimensional molecular models that rotated in mid-air. Her fingers traced patterns in empty space, and the models responded, bonds breaking and reforming according to her silent commands. The intensity of her focus was absolute, the concentration of someone racing against time itself. When she finally sensed their presence, she turned slowly, her dark eyes reflecting neither surprise nor fear. Instead, Marcus saw something that chilled him more than either emotion could have: resignation. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice carrying through the glass as clearly as if no barrier existed between them. "No one should be here." Jenny stepped backward instinctively. "We're sorry. We didn't know anyone lived out here. We can leave." "It's too late for that." Sarah's gaze shifted to something behind them, and Marcus turned to see what had captured her attention. Black SUVs wound through the forest on a road that definitely hadn't existed an hour ago. Their engines were eerily silent, and their occupants wore uniforms Marcus didn't recognize. Government plates glinted through the trees. "They've been monitoring the energy signatures," Sarah continued, now speaking more to herself than to them. "I should have known the quantum cascade would be detectable from orbit." The lead vehicle stopped 50 yards away, and figures emerged. They moved with military precision, carrying equipment that looked more suited for a hazmat situation than a wilderness encounter. One of them raised what appeared to be a scanning device toward the structure, and every monitor inside suddenly went dark. Sarah's expression shifted from resignation to something approaching panic. She pressed her palm against a black panel, and emergency lighting bathed the interior in crimson. 3 years, she muttered. "I needed 3 more years." Marcus found his voice. "Ma'am, we can help you. If you're in some kind of trouble..." Her laugh cut through the forest air like breaking glass. Trouble? You have no idea what trouble looks like. She gestured toward the approaching figures. They think I'm building weapons. They think this is about power or profit or some grand conspiracy. The scanning device in the agent's hands began emitting a high-pitched whine. But the truth, Sarah continued, her eyes reflecting the red emergency lights, is so much worse than that. Sarah had seen her share of wilderness incidents, hypothermia-induced hallucinations, altitude sickness, the occasional mushroom mishap. But as she pulled into the trailhead parking lot, the scene struck her as oddly subdued. No flashing ambulance lights, no urgent activity, just two paramedics sitting beside their vehicle, looking more puzzled than concerned. "Where are the victims?" Sarah asked, approaching the senior paramedic, a weathered man named Rodriguez she'd worked with before. "That's the thing," Rodriguez said, gesturing toward a cluster of boulders where 3 people sat wrapped in emergency blankets. "Physically, they're fine. Better than fine, actually. Blood pressure perfect, pupils normal, no signs of dehydration or exhaustion. But they keep talking about some woman in the woods who, well, you should hear it yourself." The hikers looked up as Sarah approached. 2 men in their 30s and a woman slightly younger, all wearing expensive outdoor gear that suggested serious hobbyists rather than casual day trippers. The woman, who introduced herself as Jessica, seemed to be their unofficial spokesperson. "We weren't trespassing," Jessica said immediately. "The trail markers led us there. But maybe they weren't real trail markers?" Sarah pulled out her notebook. "Tell me what happened, from the beginning." "We were following what we thought was an unmarked trail," one of the men, David, explained. "About 3 miles up from the main path. The markers looked official, same style as the Park Service uses. But older, the 3rd hiker, Marcus, added. Like they'd been there for years." Jessica nodded. "The trail led to this clearing. There was a cabin, but not like any wilderness cabin I've ever seen. It looked integrated, like it grew out of the landscape." Sarah had investigated dozens of illegal structures on public land. Squatters, off-grid enthusiasts, the occasional drug lab. What made this one different? The 3 hikers exchanged glances. "The woman who lived there," David said. "She invited us in for water. Said her name was Elena." "Describe her." 40-something, maybe early 50s, Jessica said. But there was something about her eyes, like she was calculating everything constantly, and her hands, they were stained, blue and silver stains, like she worked with metals or chemicals. Marcus leaned forward. "The inside of the cabin was impossible. I mean, architecturally impossible. The space was 3 times larger than the outside dimensions, and there were rooms that seemed to extend underground, but we were on a ridge." Sarah had heard stranger claims from people suffering exposure or dehydration, but these hikers showed no physical signs of distress. "What else do you remember?" "She offered us food," David said. "Some kind of bread, but Jessica stopped us from eating it." "Why?" Sarah asked Jessica. "Did you see any of this machinery?" "She wouldn't let us explore," Marcus said. "But through one doorway, I glimpsed what looked like a greenhouse, except the plants were moving in patterns like they were communicating." Sarah looked up from her notes. "Moving how?" "Swaying in sequence, even though there was no wind. And the colors—" Marcus shook his head. "I've never seen anything like them. Purples and greens that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them." Rodriguez approached. "Detective, we really should get them to the hospital for observation." "We're not crazy," Jessica said firmly. "Whatever we saw, we all saw the same thing. Ask us separately. Our stories will match." Sarah studied their faces. In her experience, shared delusions were rare and usually accompanied by obvious signs of distress or intoxication. These 3 seemed rational, even scientific in their observations. "How did you leave?" "She walked us out," David said, "but by a different path. We ended up back at the main trail in about 10 minutes, even though the hike-in had taken us over an hour." "And when you tried to find the trail again?" "Gone," Marcus said. "The markers, the path, everything, like it never existed." Sarah closed her notebook. I'll need you to show me exactly where you entered the unmarked trail. As the hikers led her toward the trailhead, Sarah's radio crackled again. This time it was her sergeant. Chen, we just got a call from the Forestry Service. Satellite imagery picked up thermal anomalies in your area. Unusual power signatures that don't match any known installations. Sarah looked up at the dense forest canopy, then at the three hikers walking ahead of her. Whatever they'd encountered, it was real enough to register from space. The hikers' voices carried through the trees like an alarm system Elena had never wanted to install. She crouched behind the false wall of her laboratory, watching through the fiber-optic periscope she'd built into the structure 3 years ago. 4 of them, all in their 20s, wearing the kind of expensive gear that screamed weekend warriors from Seattle or Portland. They were examining her solar array with the casual curiosity of people who had no idea they were trespassing on something that could reshape civilization. "This is definitely not Park Service," the blonde woman said, running her fingers along the polymer housing Elena had designed to look like weathered rock. "Look at these connections. This is military-grade stuff." Elena's jaw tightened. The woman knew her equipment. That complicated things. "We should go," said one of the men, his voice carrying the nervous edge of someone who'd grown up respecting property lines. "This feels private." Private in the middle of nowhere? The blonde's companion, a lean man with the kind of tan that came from serious outdoor time, was already moving toward the main compound. "Come on, Marcus. When's the next time we'll stumble across something this weird?" Elena's finger hovered over the emergency protocol button. One press would trigger the lockdown sequence. Steel shutters would slam down over every window and entrance, making the compound look like nothing more than a geological formation. But it would also trap her inside with limited air recycling, and these hikers didn't look like they'd give up easily. She studied their faces through the scope. The nervous one, Marcus, kept checking his GPS device and glancing back toward the trail. Flight risk. The other man was pure curiosity, the type who'd probably break into abandoned buildings just to see what was inside. Dangerous but predictable. It was the blonde woman who worried her. She moved with purpose, and her eyes held the particular intensity Elena recognized from her old life. The look of someone trained to analyze and understand complex systems. "Janet, seriously," Marcus tried again. "My GPS says we're way off the marked trail. Like, seriously off. And this setup," he gestured at the barely visible outline of Elena's water reclamation system, "this is somebody's home." Janet paused, and for a moment Elena thought reason might prevail. Then the woman tilted her head, listening to something Elena couldn't hear. "Do you guys hear that?" Elena's blood went cold. The synthesis chamber. She'd left it running its daily calibration cycle, and the harmonic resonance was nearly subsonic. But if you knew what to listen for... "Hear what?" The curious one, Derek, based on how Janet had addressed him earlier, stopped his examination of her camouflaged communications array. "It's like humming, but not natural." Janet moved toward the sound with the confidence of someone following scientific instinct. She stood up and walked out of the compound. "You're trespassing," she said simply, emerging from what looked like solid forest undergrowth. The 4 hikers spun toward her voice, and Elena saw the moment they processed what they were seeing. Not the wild hermit they might have expected, but a woman in practical cargo pants and a long-sleeved technical shirt, her graying hair pulled back efficiently. She looked exactly like what she was, someone with enough resources and intelligence to disappear completely who had chosen not to. "Jesus," Derek breathed. "Where did you come from?" "I live here." Elena kept her voice level, authoritative, the voice that had once commanded boardrooms and congressional hearings. "This is private property." "Ma'am," Marcus said, relief evident that they were dealing with a person rather than breaking and entering, "we're really sorry. We must have gotten turned around. Our GPS shows this as unmarked Forest Service land. Your GPS is wrong." Elena stepped closer, noting how Janet's eyes tracked her movement while simultaneously cataloging the visible technology. "You need to leave now." "What is this place?" Janet asked. She didn't back down, didn't show the appropriate deference that would have made this easier. That power setup is incredibly sophisticated. And that sound, the synthesis chamber chose that moment to complete its cycle with a resonant tone that seemed to emerge from the earth itself. Elena watched Janet's face transform as understanding began to dawn. Not complete understanding, that would be impossible without years of context, but the recognition that something significant was happening here. "I know you," Janet said suddenly. "Not personally, but you're her, aren't you? Elena Chen." Derek's eyes widened. "Wait, Elena Chen? The tech woman who lost everything," Elena finished. "Yes, and who wants to be left alone." But Janet was shaking her head, pieces falling into place behind her eyes. "You're not hiding," she said. "You're working." The medical scanner hummed to life as Sarah's fingers danced across its interface, her movements precise despite the tremor that hadn't left her hands since the compound's discovery. The three hikers sat in uncomfortable silence, their eyes darting between the sophisticated equipment surrounding them and the woman they'd assumed was a hermit just hours before. "This is impossible," Marcus whispered, watching readouts cascade across multiple screens. "We're in the middle of nowhere, and you have tech that looks 20 years ahead of anything I've seen." Sarah didn't respond immediately. She was studying the biometric data flowing from the scanners, her expression shifting from clinical detachment to something approaching wonder. The readings were unlike anything in her extensive databases: cellular activity that defied conventional understanding, neural patterns that suggested enhanced cognitive function, and most remarkably, genetic markers that shouldn't exist in nature. "The spores," she finally said, her voice barely audible. "They're not just affecting you, they're optimizing you." Elena shifted uncomfortably on the examination table. "What do you mean, optimizing?" Sarah pulled up a holographic display that made all three visitors gasp. Complex molecular structures rotated slowly in the air between them, beautiful and alien in their perfection. "What you inhaled wasn't random. These organisms are reading your genetic code and making targeted improvements. Enhanced immune response, accelerated healing, improved neural connectivity." "You're talking about human enhancement," Kai said, his voice tight with a mixture of fear and fascination. "Like actual evolution." "Directed evolution," Sarah corrected, "and it's happening faster than should be possible." She gestured to another screen showing cellular regeneration occurring in real time. "Elena, that cut on your hand from the thorns, look at it." Elena raised her palm, staring in disbelief. The wound that had been bleeding freely earlier was now barely a faint line, already healed. "This is what you've been hiding," Marcus said, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. "This is why you disappeared." Sarah's composure cracked slightly, years of isolation and guilt threatening to spill over. "You don't understand the weight of this discovery. When I first encountered these organisms 5 years ago, I thought I'd found the answer to humanity's problems: disease, aging, cognitive limitations, all potentially obsolete." She moved to a sealed container, its contents glowing with the same ethereal light they'd seen in the forest. "But then I ran the projections, mass exposure scenarios, societal impact assessments, economic disruption models. Every simulation ended the same way." "How?" Elena asked, though something in her expression suggested she already suspected the answer. "Collapse. Complete societal breakdown." Sarah's voice grew heavy with the burden of knowledge. "Imagine if enhancement became available, but only to those who could afford it. The inequality gap wouldn't just widen, it would become a literal divide between two different species of human." Kai leaned forward, studying the organism samples. "So, you've been sitting on the discovery of the century because you're afraid of what people might do with it?" "Not afraid," Sarah snapped, then caught herself. "Responsible. The world isn't ready for this level of biological manipulation. The same enhancement that could cure cancer could also be weaponized. The cognitive improvements that might solve climate change could also create a permanent class of genetic aristocracy." Marcus stood and began pacing, his journalist's mind racing. But keeping it hidden isn't solving anything either. People are still dying from diseases this could cure. Wars are still being fought that enhanced cognition might prevent. And what happens when the secret gets out anyway? Elena added. Because secrets this big don't stay buried forever. Sarah fell silent, staring at the readings that confirmed her worst fears. The hiker's exposure had been minimal, but the changes were already irreversible. Soon others would notice their enhanced abilities. Questions would be asked. You're right, she admitted quietly. I've been buying time, trying to find a solution that doesn't exist. There's no way to release this technology safely, but there's also no way to contain it indefinitely. The forest around them seemed to pulse with hidden life, millions of organisms waiting in the shadows, ready to transform anyone who encountered them. Sarah had spent 5 years as their guardian and gatekeeper, but she'd always known this day would come. The compound isn't just a research facility, she continued, her voice gaining strength. It's a prototype, a controlled environment where we can study the effects and develop protocols for wider implementation. But it was never meant to be permanent. She turned to face the 3 people who had stumbled into her carefully constructed isolation, bringing with them the outside world she'd tried so hard to keep at bay. The question now isn't whether this technology will change humanity, it's whether we can guide that change before it destroys us. The implications hung heavy in the air, as transformative and dangerous as the invisible organisms that had already begun rewriting their genetic destiny. The emergency room buzzed with controlled chaos as Chen was wheeled through the automatic doors, her breathing shallow and her pulse erratic. Dr. Sarah Kellerman had seen enough cases of exposure and dehydration to recognize the signs, but something about this patient felt different. The woman's clothes were worn but well maintained, her hands calloused yet manicured, as if she lived between 2 worlds. What do we know? Sarah asked the paramedic as they transferred Maya to a gurney. Found unconscious in the woods about 15 miles north of here. Hikers called it in. No ID, but she was mumbling something about keeping them safe when she came to briefly in the ambulance. Sarah nodded, pulling on gloves as the nursing staff began hooking up monitors. Maya's vitals stabilized quickly once they started the IV drip, faster than Sarah expected for someone who appeared to have been living rough in the wilderness. Her muscle tone suggested regular physical activity, not the wasted frame of someone struggling to survive. As Maya's eyes fluttered open, Sarah leaned closer. Can you tell me your name? Where? Maya's voice was barely a whisper. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the medical equipment, the sterile walls, the concerned faces hovering over her. Where am I? St. Mary's Hospital in Cedar Falls. You're safe. What's your name? Maya's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I don't remember. Sarah had heard that lie countless times, but something in Maya's eyes, a flicker of calculation, made her pause. This wasn't trauma-induced amnesia. This was deliberate. We need to run some tests, Sarah said gently. You've been through quite an ordeal. As the medical team worked, Maya remained alert but guarded, answering questions with careful vagueness. She claimed no memory of how she'd ended up in the forest, no recollection of family or friends who might be looking for her. But when a nurse mentioned calling the police to file a missing person report, Maya's heart rate spiked on the monitor. 3 hours later, Detective Marcus Rivera arrived at the hospital. He'd been following up on the unusual discovery the hikers had reported. Not just the unconscious woman, but the sophisticated equipment they'd glimpsed deeper in the woods before being chased away by what they described as some kind of security system. Miss Doe, Rivera said, settling into the chair beside Maya's bed. She'd been moved to a private room, her condition stable but still under observation. That's what we're calling you for now. The hikers who found you mentioned seeing some interesting things in the forest. Want to tell me about that? Maya's face remained impassive. I told the doctor. I don't remember anything. Funny thing about memory, Rivera mused, pulling out his phone. Sometimes a picture can help jog things loose. He showed her a photograph one of the hikers had managed to take before fleeing, a blurry image of what looked like solar panels and metallic structures camouflaged among the trees. For just a moment, Maya's composure cracked. Rivera caught the flash of panic in her eyes before she looked away. "Never seen it before," she said, but her hands had unconsciously clenched the hospital blanket. Rivera leaned back in his chair. In his 15 years as a detective, he'd developed a sense for when a case was bigger than it appeared. The sophisticated equipment, the woman's obvious intelligence despite her claims of amnesia, the way she carried herself, none of it added up to a simple story of someone lost in the woods. "You know what's interesting?" he continued conversationally. "We ran your fingerprints through the system. Nothing came up, which is unusual. Most people leave traces, driver's licenses, background checks, medical records. It's like you didn't exist before today." Maya turned to face him, and for a moment Rivera saw something that made him straighten in his chair. It wasn't fear or confusion. It was the look of someone calculating odds, weighing options, with the precision of a chess master. "Maybe I didn't," she said quietly. Before Rivera could respond, Dr. Kellerman knocked and entered. "Excuse me, detective, but visiting hours are over. My patient needs rest." Rivera stood but kept his eyes on Maya. "We'll talk again tomorrow. And Miss Doe, we'll be posting an officer outside your room, for your protection, of course." The gentle hum of the hospital's machinery reminded her of another sound, the quiet whir of the quantum processors hidden in her forest laboratory. By now, the automated systems would have detected the breach, would be implementing the security protocols she'd programmed years ago. The question was whether those protocols would be enough to protect what she'd built, or if she'd have to make the choice she'd been dreading, reveal the truth about who she was and what she'd created, or watch it all be destroyed to keep it safe. The silence in the laboratory stretched like a taut wire. Maya's words hung in the air, "I'm going to save them," while the hikers stood frozen, trying to process what they'd witnessed. The neural interface headset sat innocuous on the metal table, its sleek surface reflecting the overhead lights like a promise and a threat. Maya moved to a cabinet and withdrew a thick folder, her movements deliberate and controlled. "My daughter Emma was 7 when the seizures started. My husband David developed early-onset Alzheimer's at 42. She opened the folder, revealing medical records, test results, and photographs of a beautiful family that no longer existed. The pharmaceutical companies could have helped them. The technology existed, but there was no profit in rare conditions, no market incentive for cures that would only help thousands instead of millions. Jake stepped closer to the monitors, his technical background drawing him to the data streams. The patterns were unlike anything he'd seen before, neural pathways lighting up in complex cascades, synaptic responses that seemed almost choreographed. These readings, they're not from damaged brains. Very good. Maya's smile held no warmth. Those are from healthy subjects. My subjects. I've been testing the interface on myself for 2 years. The implications hit Tom like a physical blow. You've been experimenting on yourself? That's insane. Insane. Maya's laugh was sharp. Do you know what's insane? Watching your child seize for hours while doctors throw up their hands because the research funding dried up. Watching your husband forget your name while pharmaceutical executives count their billions. She pulled out a photograph, a little girl with Maya's eyes smiling on a tire swing. They both died within 6 months of each other. The treatments that could have saved them existed in theory, but no one wanted to risk the investment. Lisa felt her legs weaken. The tragedy was written in every line of Maya's face, every calculated movement of her hands. So you decided to solve it yourself. The room felt smaller suddenly, the weight of possibility and terror pressing down on them. Sarah found her voice first. That's impossible. The complexity alone. 3 years ago, yes, but I had advantages." Maya's eyes glittered with something between pride and madness. Unlimited funding from my personal fortune before it was seized, no regulatory oversight, no corporate boards demanding quarterly profits, and most importantly, she gestured to the forest visible through the lab's windows, complete isolation to work without interruption. Jake was studying the interface headset more closely now, noting the intricate neural mesh visible through its transparent sections. the computing power required for real-time neural manipulation. How are you processing that much data? Maya's smile widened. Quantum processors. I designed them myself, based on principles that won't see commercial application for another decade. The processing array is housed 3 levels below us, cooled by the underground river system. She moved to a wall panel and pressed her palm against it. The entire wall became transparent, revealing a vast underground facility stretching into darkness. 40 quantum cores running in parallel, creating a computational matrix that rivals the human brain itself. The scope of it was staggering. Tom felt his mind reeling as he tried to comprehend the years of work, the billions of dollars in equipment, the sheer audacity of what Maya had accomplished. You built all this alone? Not entirely. I had help in the beginning. Engineers, researchers, people who believed in the vision. But as word of my family's death spread, as the media painted me as the villain who destroyed Chen Industries and cost thousands of jobs, Maya's voice hardened. They abandoned the project. Corporate loyalty only extends so far. So you continued alone, Lisa whispered. I had to. Emma and David were gone, but millions of others were still suffering, still waiting for treatments that would never come because they weren't profitable enough. Maya turned back to the neural interface, her fingers tracing its edges with something approaching reverence. This technology could end neurological suffering forever. No more children watching their grandparents fade away. No more families destroyed by conditions we have the power to cure. Maya's expression darkened, and for the first time, genuine fear flickered in her eyes. Because I know what they'll do with it. The signal died at 3:17 a.m. Marcus Chen had been monitoring the compound's perimeter sensors from his makeshift command post in the ranger station when every feed went dark simultaneously. Not a gradual failure or weather interference, a complete coordinated blackout that spoke of deliberate action. She knows we're here, he muttered into his radio, trying to raise Agent Torres at the secondary observation point. Static answered him. Through his night vision scope, Marcus watched the compound's structures fade into absolute darkness. Even the soft bioluminescent glow that had emanated from the central laboratory vanished, as if someone had thrown a switch and erased the entire facility from existence. His satellite phone buzzed. Director Hawthorne's voice crackled through the encrypted connection. Chen, what's your status? We're showing total communication loss from your sector. Target has gone dark, sir. All surveillance compromised as of 3 minutes ago. I count at least 4 heat signatures moving through the compound, but visibility is near 0. 4. Our intelligence suggested she was operating alone. Marcus adjusted his scope, scanning the tree line. Negative, sir. She's got help. Professional help, by the way they're moving. A branch snapped behind him. Marcus spun, weapon drawn that found only shadow and forest. His pulse hammered against his eardrums as he pressed his back against the station's wooden wall. Chen? Chen, respond. He couldn't answer. 50 yards away, a figure emerged from the darkness, not running, not hiding, but walking with the confident stride of someone who owned these woods. Dr. Sarah Elena Vasquez approached his position as if she'd known exactly where he was hiding all along. She wore tactical gear now instead of the simple clothes from the surveillance photos. Her dark hair was pulled back, and even in the dim starlight, Marcus could see the transformation in her bearing. This wasn't the broken billionaire from the news footage. This was someone who had found purpose in exile. Agent Chen. Her voice carried clearly across the distance. I know you can hear me. Your backup is 3 miles out, and your communications array is operating on a frequency I've been monitoring for the past 6 hours. Marcus's grip tightened on his weapon. How did she know his name? You've been watching my work, she continued, moving closer. I assume you have questions. The real question is whether you're here to understand or to destroy. Against every protocol, Marcus found himself stepping into the open. Something in her tone, not threatening but urgent, made him pause. Dr. Vasquez, I'm with the Department of Energy's Special Investigations Unit. You need to come with me. She stopped 20 feet away, close enough that he could see her clearly now. The intensity in her eyes reminded him why she'd once commanded boardrooms and congressional hearings. The same department that buried my warnings about the Meridian facility? The one that classified my research after it could have prevented 3 reactor incidents? That's above my clearance level. Everything important is above someone's clearance level. She gestured toward the compound. Do you know what I've built here, Agent Chen? Marcus had studied the aerial footage, the thermal readings, the scattered intelligence reports. The honest answer was no. Some kind of biological research facility, possibly weapons development. Sarah's laugh held no humor. Weapons? Of course, that's where your minds go. She pulled a small device from her pocket. Marcus tensed, but she held it openly, clearly not a threat. This is a real-time atmospheric processor. It's reading carbon dioxide, methane, particulate density, and 47 other environmental markers in a 3-mile radius. The device's screen glowed softly blue. Even from his distance, Marcus could see the dancing readouts. 3 years ago, those numbers would have been 30% higher, she said. The forest around us is healing, Agent Chen. The soil microbiome has increased by orders of magnitude. The water table is cleaner than it's been in a century. And the wildlife, she paused as an owl called from somewhere above them. Species that hadn't been seen in this region for decades are returning. What does that have to do with everything? She stepped closer, and Marcus found himself lowering his weapon slightly. The technology I developed here doesn't just clean the environment. It accelerates natural healing processes in organisms, in ecosystems, in people. The implications hit him like cold water. You're talking about biological manipulation on a massive scale. I'm talking about survival. Her voice intensified. The climate reports they don't show the public, the projections that stay classified. We have maybe 15 years before ecological collapse becomes irreversible, maybe less. Marcus's earpiece crackled to life. Director Hawthorne's voice was sharp with concern. Chen, we're showing multiple vehicle signatures approaching your location. Whatever's happening there, you need to extract now. Sarah heard it too. Her expression hardened. They're not here to listen, are they? The distant sound of helicopter rotors began to echo through the forest, growing louder by the second. Sarah looked up at the night sky, then back at Marcus with something that might have been disappointment. Then you'd better see what you came to destroy, she said, and turned toward the compound. The monitoring station's screens cast an eerie blue glow across Elena's face as she watched the heat signatures of the hikers moving through the forest. They had found the outer perimeter sooner than she'd anticipated. Her fingers danced across the holographic interface, tracking their progress through the network of sensors she'd embedded in the trees over the past 3 years. Proximity alert, Sector 7, the AI's voice whispered through the compound. She had programmed it to sound like her daughter's voice, a decision that still brought her both comfort and pain. Elena's jaw tightened as she observed the group's movements. 4 individuals, moving with purpose rather than the wandering gait of lost hikers. Their heat signatures showed elevated stress levels, and thermal imaging revealed they carried more equipment than typical day hikers would need. The lead figure paused frequently, seemingly scanning the environment with something that produced its own faint electromagnetic signature. Professional trackers, or worse. She activated the holographic display that showed the compound from above, a sprawling network of bio-integrated structures that seemed to breathe with the forest itself. The main laboratory sat at the center, its living walls pulsing with bioluminescent veins that carried both nutrients and data throughout the complex. Around it, smaller pods housed the prototypes, each one a step closer to her ultimate goal. The guilt crashed over her like it did every morning when she saw what she'd built. 5 years ago, her neural interface technology had promised to cure paralysis, restore sight, enhance human cognitive capacity. Instead, it had been weaponized, turned into a tool for surveillance and control. The scandal that followed had destroyed everything, her company, her reputation, her family's safety. Marcus and Lily had died because she'd been naive enough to trust the wrong people with her life's work. But this time would be different. This time she controlled every variable. Elena moved through the corridor that connected the monitoring station to her primary lab, the walls responding to her presence with gentle waves of light. The bioneural network she'd developed here was more than just technology. It was a living system that learned, adapted, and evolved. Unlike her previous work, this couldn't be corrupted or stolen because it existed as a symbiotic relationship between human consciousness and organic computing matrices. She paused before the observation window that looked into the incubation chamber. Suspended in translucent pods, 12 humanoid forms floated in nutrient-rich fluid. Their bodies were perfect amalgamations of human biology and her revolutionary biotech, capable of surviving in environments that would kill unenhanced humans. More importantly, their neural architecture made them immune to the digital manipulation that had turned her first creation into an instrument of oppression. The next phase of human evolution, one that couldn't be controlled by governments or corporations. Movement on the perimeter screens caught her attention. The tracking team had split up, with 2 individuals circling toward the compound's main entrance while the others approached from the north. They moved with military precision, confirming her worst suspicions. Someone had found her. Elena's fingers trembled as she initiated the defensive protocols. The compound began to shift, its biomechanical systems redirecting energy to camouflage and protection modes. The exterior walls darkened, their bioluminescent patterns fading to match the surrounding forest. Microscopic spores released into the air would confuse electronic tracking devices, while pheromone dispensers created scent trails leading away from the compound. But she knew these measures would only delay the inevitable. If they had found her once, others would follow. The project wasn't ready. The prototypes needed at least 6 more months of development before they could survive independently. She had planned to release them gradually, allowing them to integrate into human society before anyone realized what they were. Now that timeline had accelerated dramatically. A soft chime indicated someone was accessing the outer airlock. Elena's blood ran cold as she realized the trackers had moved faster than her sensors had shown. Either their technology was more advanced than she'd anticipated, or they had inside knowledge of her security systems. She activated the emergency protocols, flooding the incubation chamber with synthetic hormones that would accelerate the development process. The 12 forms began to stir, their enhanced nervous systems responding to the chemical signals. Within hours they would be conscious. Within days they would be ready to leave the compound. Elena pulled up the communication array, her fingers hovering over the quantum encryption keys. She had prepared for this moment, establishing secure channels to research facilities and bioethics organizations around the world. If they wanted to destroy her work again, she would ensure that the knowledge survived, scattered across enough locations that no single entity could control or suppress it. The compound's sensors detected movement in the main corridor. They were inside. Elena took one last look at the observation chamber, watching as the first prototype's eyes fluttered open, eyes that held intelligence far beyond what humanity had ever achieved. She smiled despite the tears streaming down her face. This time, she wouldn't let them win. The secure facility's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Dr. Sarah Chen stood before the massive server banks, their blue LEDs pulsing like a digital heartbeat. Marcus watched from the observation deck above, his fingers drumming against the reinforced glass. 3 days had passed since they'd brought Sarah in, and Elena Vasquez remained as enigmatic as ever. "The quantum processing cores are unlike anything I've seen," Sarah murmured to her recording device, walking slowly between the towering machines. "The architecture suggests simultaneous processing across multiple dimensional matrices. If my calculations are correct, this system could simulate entire biological ecosystems in real time." Sarah nodded, moving toward the biolab section where glass chambers lined the walls like sleeping pods. Inside each one, Marcus could see what appeared to be organic tissue, suspended in nutrient-rich fluid, connected to hairline neural networks that sparkled with electrical activity. The sight made his stomach clench. "Marcus," Agent Rivera's voice crackled through his earpiece. "We've got a problem. The perimeter sensors picked up movement 2 clicks northeast. Could be wildlife, but the thermal signature doesn't match any known species in this region." He grabbed his binoculars and stepped onto the facility's external platform. The forest stretched endlessly in all directions, a green canopy broken only by distant mountain peaks. Movement caught his eye, a flash of silver between the trees, too deliberate to be natural. "Rivera, I need teams 2 and 3 to establish a wider perimeter. Whatever's out there, I don't want it getting close to Dr. Chen." Below in the lab, Sarah had discovered something that made her freeze mid-step. "This is impossible," she whispered, leaning closer to one of the biochambers. Inside, what had appeared to be simple tissue culture was actually something far more complex, neural pathways that seemed to pulse with their own intelligence, forming patterns that reminded her of brain scans she'd seen in consciousness research. "Marcus, you need to see this immediately." He was already moving, taking the stairs 3 at a time. When he reached Sarah's side, she pointed to a series of monitors displaying real-time neural activity from the chambers. "These aren't just tissue samples," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're thinking." Each chamber contains what appears to be a distributed consciousness network. Elena isn't just simulating ecosystems, she's creating them, living, thinking ecosystems. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. "Are you saying she's created artificial life?" "Not artificial, enhanced. Look at this data." Sarah pulled up a holographic display showing interconnected neural pathways that seemed to extend beyond individual chambers. The consciousness networks are communicating with each other, forming larger collective intelligences. And these readings suggest they're not confined to the biochambers. Marcus's earpiece crackled again. "Sir, you need to get up here now. We've got multiple thermal signatures converging on our position. They're moving in coordinated patterns." Through the lab's reinforced windows, Marcus could see them, humanoid shapes emerging from the forest with fluid, purposeful movements. But something was wrong with their silhouettes. They moved too smoothly, too perfectly synchronized, as if controlled by a single intelligence. "Sarah, we need to evacuate now." But she was transfixed by the monitors, watching as the neural activity in the biochambers suddenly spiked in unison. "Marcus, they're responding to the external threat. The consciousness networks are communicating with something outside the facility." The lights flickered, and the facility's AI system spoke in its calm, measured tone. "Security protocol activated. External entities have been granted facility access. Dr. Vasquez is requesting audience with current occupants." "Override that authorization," Marcus barked, but the system didn't respond. The main doors slid open with a pneumatic hiss, and Elena Vasquez walked in, flanked by 6 figures that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. They appeared human at first glance, but their movements were too fluid, their eyes reflecting light like polished metal. Enhanced humans, or something that had once been human. "Dr. Chen, Agent Morrison," Elena said pleasantly, as if greeting dinner guests. "I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but your presence here has accelerated my timeline considerably." Sarah stepped forward, scientific curiosity overriding her fear. "The biochambers, you're not just creating consciousness networks, you're transferring human consciousness into enhanced biological matrices." "Very good. Though transferring isn't quite accurate. I'm elevating it, freeing it from the limitations of our current biological constraints." Elena gestured to her companions. "These volunteers helped me perfect the process. They retained their memories, their personalities, but gained capabilities that our species desperately needs." Marcus drew his weapon, though he suspected it would be useless. "Needs for what?" Elena's expression grew grave. "For what's coming. The ecological collapse that governments refuse to acknowledge. The resource wars that will devastate civilization within decades." Humanity, as we know it, won't survive what we've done to this planet. She gestured to the biochambers around them. But this version might. The neural interface felt cold against Maya's temple as she demonstrated the connection process to the three hikers. Their faces reflected a mixture of fascination and terror as the holographic display materialized in the air before them, showing synaptic pathways lighting up like a city at night. The human brain processes information at roughly 20 bits per second, Maya explained, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. This system operates at 10,000 times that rate, but speed isn't the real breakthrough. It's the elimination of information loss between minds. Jake stepped closer to the projection, his earlier hostility replaced by reluctant curiosity. You're talking about telepathy. I'm talking about something far more profound. Maya gestured to the swirling patterns of light. When you try to explain a concept to someone, how much is lost in translation? How many wars have started because of miscommunication? How many discoveries have been delayed because brilliant minds couldn't truly share their insights? Sarah watched the display with growing unease. But why hide it? Why not share this with the world? The question hung in the air like smoke. Maya's expression darkened as she disconnected from the interface, the hologram dissolving. Because I've seen what humanity does with power. She led them deeper into the compound. Past laboratories filled with equipment worth millions, past servers humming with barely contained computational force. They stopped at a reinforced door that required both biometric and vocal authentication. Beyond it lay a room that made the previous spaces seem primitive by comparison. 3 years ago, before my world collapsed, I was developing military applications for the Pentagon, Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. Enhanced interrogation systems, ways to extract information directly from captured minds. The potential for abuse was limitless, and they knew it. They wanted it. The new chamber contained what appeared to be a massive organic computer, its surfaces pulsing with bioluminescent veins. Dozens of neural interfaces hung from the ceiling like sleeping serpents. When the scandal broke, when my family died in that car accident that wasn't an accident, I realized they would kill anyone to get this technology. My board, my investors, the government, they all wanted to weaponize what I'd created. Marcus had been silent until now, but the sight of the organic computer triggered something in his memory. You're Dr. Maya Chen, the neural systems pioneer. They said you embezzled millions and fled when the SEC closed in. Maya's laugh was bitter. I took what was mine before they could steal it. Every line of code, every breakthrough, every sleepless night of work. They painted me as a thief to justify hunting me down. She approached one of the interfaces, running her fingers along its biomechanical surface. But here, alone, I've perfected something they never imagined. Not just mind-to-mind communication, but the ability to merge consciousness itself, to create a collective intelligence that maintains individual identity while sharing collective knowledge. That's impossible, Sarah breathed. Is it? Maya's eyes gleamed with manic intensity. What if humanity could share not just information but understanding? What if the solution to climate change discovered by a scientist in Mumbai could be instantly comprehended by engineers in Detroit? What if the empathy of a teacher in rural Kenya could be felt by a politician in Washington? Jake backed toward the door. Or what if a dictator could control millions of minds simultaneously? You're talking about the end of free will. I'm talking about evolution. Maya's composure cracked, revealing the obsession that had driven her into isolation. The human species is failing because we're limited by our individual perspectives. We repeat the same mistakes, fight the same wars, ignore the same problems because we can't truly understand each other. The room's bioluminescent patterns pulsed faster, responding to Maya's emotional state. Sarah noticed that some of the interfaces were already connected to the central system, their ends disappearing into tanks filled with cloudy fluid. What's in those tanks? She asked, though part of her already knew she didn't want the answer. Maya's smile was both proud and terrifying. The first volunteers, Researchers who shared my vision, they've been connected for 6 months now, exploring the boundaries of merged consciousness. They're still themselves, but also something more. Marcus moved to one of the tanks, peering through the murky liquid. A human form floated inside, multiple neural interfaces buried in their skull, their face serene but somehow empty. They're still alive, Maya continued, but their minds exist in a space between individual and collective thought. They've seen things, understood things that no single human brain could comprehend alone. The implications crashed over the three hikers like a tsunami. This wasn't just hidden technology, it was the potential transformation of human consciousness itself, controlled by a woman whose grip on sanity had been shattered by tragedy and isolation. The question isn't whether humanity is ready for this, Maya said softly. The question is whether humanity can survive without it. The neural interface crown felt cold against Marcus's temples as Elena adjusted the final calibration nodes. Sarah watched from across the makeshift laboratory, her arms crossed, while David paced nervously near the equipment racks that hummed with barely contained energy. "I need you to understand," Elena said, her fingers dancing across a holographic display that materialized from the crown's base. "What you're about to experience isn't virtual reality, it's consciousness translation. You'll be experiencing actual memories, mine and others who've worn this device." Marcus swallowed hard. Others? Test subjects. Volunteers who came before the world decided I was a monster. Elena's voice carried years of accumulated bitterness. People who believed, like I do, that humanity's next evolutionary step isn't biological, it's neurological. The crown activated with a subtle vibration that seemed to penetrate Marcus's skull. The laboratory around him began to dissolve, reality bleeding away like watercolors in rain. For a moment, he existed in a grey void where time had no meaning. Then the memories hit him. He was Elena, standing in a sterile research facility 5 years ago, watching a paralyzed woman take her first steps in decades through a neural link to a robotic exoskeleton. The joy on the woman's face was transcendent, tears streaming as she walked toward her daughter's embrace. The scene shifted. Now he experienced the terror of Elena's first public demonstration gone wrong, feeling her panic as the volunteer subject convulsed on stage while investors fled the auditorium. The media headlines that followed felt like physical blows. Tech mogul's deadly experiment, neural interface kills volunteer, the Frankenstein of Silicon Valley. Another memory cascade. Elena in her mansion study, reading the investigative reports that revealed how her business partner had sabotaged the neural pathways, causing the fatal feedback loop. The betrayal cut deeper than any financial loss. David Kim, her trusted friend, had sold her out to competitors who wanted her technology buried forever. Marcus felt Elena's anguish as she watched news footage of her family's funeral, knowing she couldn't attend without being arrested. The guilt was suffocating. Her daughter's car accident, her husband's heart attack from the stress, indirect casualties of the scandal that destroyed everything she'd built. The memories accelerated. Elena's months of research in the forest, perfecting the technology in isolation, the breakthrough that allowed consciousness to be temporarily stored and shared between minds, the realization that she could create a collective human experience, not to control minds but to foster unprecedented empathy and understanding. Experienced her first successful test, linking with a dying forest ranger who'd stumbled upon her compound. Through the neural bridge, she'd shared his memories of the wilderness, his love for the natural world, his fear of humanity's environmental destruction. In return, she'd given him her scientific knowledge, her vision of technology serving nature instead of conquering it. The crown's neural pathways opened wider, and Marcus found himself experiencing memories that weren't Elena's. A young scientist's excitement at discovering a cure for Alzheimer's through neural mapping. A war veteran's relief as traumatic memories were carefully extracted and processed. A deaf child's first experience of sound through synthetic neural stimulation. But darker memories surfaced too. Government agents tracking Elena's research. corporate assassins hired to ensure the technology never reached public knowledge. The real reason the original demonstration had been sabotaged. Not just corporate espionage, but fear from powerful interests who understood the technology's true implications. If consciousness could be shared and stored, traditional power structures would crumble. No more information hoarding, no more propaganda, no more artificial scarcity of knowledge. Every human could potentially access the accumulated wisdom and experience of the entire species. Marcus felt Elena's growing desperation as she realized the magnitude of the forces arrayed against her work. The technology wasn't just revolutionary, it was apocalyptic for those who controlled society through information asymmetry. The final memory sequence showed Elena's plan crystallizing. She wouldn't try to introduce the technology gradually or seek official approval. Instead, she would create an irrefutable demonstration. When the time was right, she would share her consciousness and her proof with enough people simultaneously that the truth couldn't be suppressed or distorted. The Crown's neural bridge began to fade, reality slowly reassembling around Marcus. But in those final moments of connection, he experienced something that made his blood freeze. Elena's current thoughts. Her real plan for him and the others. She intended to use them as conduits, broadcasting her memories and the truth about her technology through their neural patterns to thousands of people worldwide. The process would fundamentally alter their brain chemistry. They would survive, but they would never be the same. Part of Elena's consciousness would remain permanently integrated with their own. The Crown powered down, and Marcus found himself back in the laboratory, gasping as his individual consciousness reasserted itself. Elena stood before him, her expression a mixture of hope and terrible resolve. "Now you understand," she said quietly. "The question isn't whether you'll help me. The neural integration has already begun. The question is whether you'll fight it or embrace humanity's next evolutionary step." The quantum field generator hummed with an otherworldly resonance as Sarah's fingers danced across the holographic interface. 3 days had passed since the hiker's arrival, and the compound buzzed with controlled chaos. Marcus worked alongside Dr. Chen, their earlier skepticism replaced by fevered dedication as they helped calibrate the consciousness mapping arrays. "The neural pattern stability is holding at 97%, Chen announced, her voice tight with concentration. "But Sarah, the power requirements for a full deployment will be met," Sarah interrupted, not looking up from her work. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, testament to the sleepless nights she'd spent pushing the project toward completion. "The fusion cells can handle the load for the initial phase." Emma stood at the observation deck, watching the activity below with growing unease. The enthusiasm that had initially swept through the group was beginning to crack under the weight of what they were actually attempting. The device before them wasn't just revolutionary, it was potentially catastrophic if something went wrong. "You're having second thoughts," Marcus said, joining her at the railing. "Aren't you?" Emma's voice carried a tremor she couldn't suppress. "We're talking about fundamentally altering human consciousness. What if we're wrong about the safeguards? What if we're right?" Marcus gestured toward the main chamber where Sarah continued her work with single-minded intensity. "Do you understand what she's offering us? The end of human suffering as we know it. No more depression, no more crippling anxiety, no more authenticity," Emma finished. "No more struggle that makes us human." Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp alarm that echoed through the compound. Sarah's head snapped up from her work as red warning lights bathed the chamber in an ominous glow. "Perimeter breach," Arya's voice announced with mechanical calm. "Multiple vehicles approaching from the eastern access road. Estimated arrival, 12 minutes. Sarah's face went ashen. "Government?" "Negative. Corporate security vehicles, cross-referencing license plates with corporate databases. Match found. Meridian Industries." The name hit Sarah like a physical blow. Meridian, her former company, now controlled by the board that had orchestrated her downfall. They'd found her. "How?" Dr. Chen asked, her scientific mind automatically seeking explanations even in crisis. Sarah's expression hardened as understanding dawned. The satellite imagery. They've been monitoring this area ever since the scandal broke, waiting for any sign of unusual activity. She turned to address the group, her voice taking on the commanding tone that had once run a billion-dollar empire. "We have maybe 10 minutes before they breach the compound. Can we stop them?" Marcus asked. The external defenses were designed for wildlife and weather, not a corporate assault team. Sarah's fingers flew across the interface, bringing up security protocols. "But we can buy time. The consciousness bridge is nearly complete. If we can establish even a limited connection, prove the concept works." Sarah paused, her gaze sweeping across each of them. "They can destroy the compound, but they can't destroy an idea that's already been shared." "You're talking about using ourselves as test subjects," Dr. Chen said, her scientific training warring with her survival instincts. "I'm talking about ensuring that this technology doesn't die with us in this compound." Sarah's voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. "Meridian will bury this research, classify it, weaponize it. We have one chance to show the world what's possible." The compound shuddered as the first explosive charges detonated against the outer barriers. Through the reinforced windows, they could see black vehicles disgorging tactical teams in corporate security uniforms. 4 minutes, Arya announced. Sarah was already moving, her hands racing across control surfaces as she brought the consciousness bridge online ahead of schedule. Warning indicators flashed as systems strained under the premature activation, but the core quantum field held stable. "The neural interfaces," she called out, gesturing toward 4 sleek headsets connected to the main array. "If we link our consciousness patterns now, create a stable bridge between our minds, the data will be preserved even if they destroy everything else." Emma stared at the interface, paralyzed by the magnitude of the decision before them. Around her, the others grappled with the same impossible choice: trust in Sarah's vision or face whatever Meridian had planned for them. "The technology isn't fully tested," Dr. Chen protested. "Nothing worthwhile ever is," Sarah replied, already placing one of the neural interfaces on her head. "But I've spent 5 years perfecting the safeguards. I wouldn't ask you to risk something I haven't already risked myself." Another explosion, closer this time. The lights flickered as backup power systems engaged. 2 minutes to breach, Arya warned. Sarah's eyes found each of theirs in turn. "This is bigger than any of us. Bigger than our fears, our doubts, our need for certainty. The question isn't whether we're ready, it's whether humanity is ready for what comes next." The decision hung in the air like a living thing, waiting. The emergency alert pierced through the mountain air like a digital scream. Every phone within a 50-mile radius buzzed simultaneously, displaying the same stark message: immediate evacuation required. Proceed to designated safe zones. This ice not a drill. Sarah Chen stared at her device, watching the cascade of panicked messages flooding social media, videos of military convoys snaking up mountain roads, helicopter formations darkening the sky. Her hands trembled as she realized the scope of what was unfolding, not just around her compound, but across 3 states. "They're not just coming for me," she whispered to Marcus, who was frantically typing at his laptop. "They're clearing everyone out." The quantum field generator hummed ominously behind them, its crystalline core pulsing with an otherworldly light that seemed to bend reality around its edges. The readings on her monitors showed energy signatures spiking beyond anything she'd ever recorded. Whatever the government knew about her work, they understood its potential far better than she'd imagined. "Sarah, look at this." Marcus turned his screen toward her, displaying intercepted military communications. "They're calling it Operation Pandora. They have blueprints, detailed schematics of your entire facility." Her blood ran cold. Those blueprints had been destroyed years ago, buried in the deepest servers of her former company. Someone had been watching her much longer than she'd realized, documenting every innovation, every breakthrough. Dr. Elizabeth Reeves emerged from the lower laboratory, her face pale with urgency. The quantum field is destabilizing. Without proper containment protocols, we're looking at a potential reality fracture spanning hundreds of miles. The evacuation, they know what happens if this goes critical. The three hikers, Jake, Emma, and David, huddled near the entrance, their faces reflecting the terror of ordinary people caught in something beyond comprehension. Jake kept checking his phone, desperately trying to reach his girlfriend in Denver. "The signals are being jammed," he said, his voice cracking. "Everything's down except those emergency broadcasts." Sarah closed her eyes, the weight of her decision pressing down like the mountain itself. For 6 years, she'd told herself she was protecting humanity by keeping her discovery hidden. But now, watching the systematic evacuation of an entire region, she understood the terrible mathematics of her situation. Her technology could save millions of lives, or end civilization as they knew it. The quantum field generator wasn't just a source of unlimited clean energy. At its core lay something far more profound, the ability to manipulate the fundamental structure of space-time itself. In the right hands, it could eliminate scarcity, end hunger, reverse climate change. In the wrong hands, it could unravel the fabric of existence. Through the compound's reinforced windows, Sarah could see dust clouds rising from the valley below. The evacuation was proceeding with military precision, but she knew it was just the opening move. Soon would come the specialists, the containment teams, the people who would strip away everything she'd built and weaponize it. Marcus's fingers flew across his keyboard. "I'm uploading everything to distributed servers worldwide. If we're going down, at least the knowledge survives." "No!" Sarah's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Delete it all!" The room fell silent, except for the generator's hypnotic hum. "Sarah, you can't be serious," Elizabeth protested. "This research represents the next evolutionary step for our species. Look around us." Sarah gestured toward the evacuation sirens, echoing through the mountains. "They're moving civilians out of blast radius. They know exactly what this technology can do, and they've already decided how to use it." She moved to the primary control panel, her hands hovering over the shutdown sequence. 6 years of work, countless breakthroughs that could transform human civilization, all waiting for her decision. Jake stepped forward, his young face earnest with desperation. "My girlfriend, my family, they're all in the evacuation zone. Whatever this machine can do, maybe it can help them." "That's exactly the problem," Sarah replied softly. "It can help them. It can help everyone. But it can also destroy everything we've ever known, and the people coming for us, they won't see the difference." The generator's hum shifted frequency, becoming something felt rather than heard. Reality seemed to shimmer at the edges of her vision, as if the world itself was holding its breath. In the distance, the first military helicopters crested the ridge, their rotors cutting through the mountain air like harbingers of an ending she'd spent 6 years trying to prevent. Sarah's finger moved toward the emergency shutdown, knowing that once she pressed it, there would be no going back. The question that had driven her into exile still burned in her mind. What price was too high for paradise? The helicopters drew closer, and the quantum field pulsed with increasing instability, as if it too sensed the approaching storm. The compound's main laboratory hummed with an energy that seemed almost alive, banks of quantum processors casting prismatic light across Elena's weathered face. She moved between the workstations with practiced efficiency, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces that materialized at her touch. 3 years of isolation had transformed her from polished CEO to something wilder, more focused, a scientist unbound by corporate constraints or public scrutiny. "The neural mapping protocols are nearly complete," she murmured to herself, pulling up a 3-dimensional model of the human brain that rotated slowly in the air before her. Millions of neural pathways pulsed with soft blue light, each connection representing years of painstaking research. Just a few more calibrations, and the transfer matrix should stabilize. Outside, the forest pressed against the reinforced windows of her sanctuary. The hikers who had stumbled upon her compound 2 days ago were gone now, convinced by her security team that they'd simply discovered an abandoned research station. But their presence had rattled her. The world beyond these trees felt closer than it had in months. full of judgment and questions she wasn't ready to answer. Elena's fingers hesitated over the final command sequence. The weight of what she was about to test pressed down on her shoulders like a physical force. 3 years of work, 3 years of rebuilding everything she'd lost, of proving that her theories weren't the delusional fantasies her former board had claimed them to be. The scandal that had destroyed next-gen industries and taken her family from her seemed like another lifetime now, but the drive to vindicate herself burned as fiercely as ever. The laboratory door hissed open behind her. Marcus Volkov entered carrying a steaming cup of coffee, his expression carefully neutral. She'd recruited him from the ruins of her former company, one of the few researchers who had believed in her vision even after the world branded her a fraud. "The subject is prepped," he said quietly, setting the coffee beside her workstation. "But Elena, I have to ask one more time. Are you certain about this? The ethical implications alone." "Ethics?" Elena's laugh held no warmth. "They destroyed my reputation, Marcus. Called my research pseudoscience. Said I was chasing impossible dreams while real people suffered." She gestured toward the neural map still rotating before them. "This isn't a dream. This is humanity's next evolutionary step." Marcus studied the readouts scrolling across his tablet. The test subject shows no signs of neural degradation. Brain activity is within normal parameters. But what we're attempting, transferring consciousness itself, backing up a human mind like it's computer data, it's never been done before. Because no one has had the courage to try. Elena's eyes blazed with conviction. Every great leap forward in human history has required someone willing to take that first step into the unknown. My daughter understood that. She believed in this work even when... Her voice caught, and she turned away. The memory of Sarah's final message still haunted her. Her brilliant daughter, following in her footsteps as a neuroscientist, had been working on complementary research when the scandal broke. The public humiliation, the death threats, the complete destruction of their family's legacy, it had been too much. Sarah's suicide note had been just 3 words: "Prove them wrong." "The consciousness transfer isn't just about cheating death," Elena continued, her voice steadying. "It's about preserving human knowledge, human experience. Imagine if we could save the minds of our greatest thinkers, our most compassionate leaders. No more losing Einstein at 66 or Gandhi at 78. We could accumulate wisdom across centuries instead of starting from scratch with each generation." Marcus nodded slowly, though concern still creased his features. "And if something goes wrong? If the transfer damages the original mind or creates some kind of incomplete copy? Then we learn from it. Science advances through failure as much as success." Elena pulled up another interface, this one showing a cylindrical chamber in the adjacent room. Inside, surrounded by quantum field generators and neural interface arrays, lay their test subject. A terminally ill volunteer who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The final diagnostic completed with a soft chime. All systems showed green. Elena's hand moved to the activation switch, then paused. Once she triggered this sequence, there would be no going back. The world would have its first digitally preserved human consciousness, or she would have her first catastrophic failure. But failure was a luxury she couldn't afford, not with Sarah's memory driving her forward, not with the chance to revolutionize human existence itself waiting behind a single switch. "Begin the transfer," she whispered, and pressed the button. The laboratory erupted in light as quantum fields synchronized with neural patterns, and Elena Vasquez took her first step toward changing the very nature of what it meant to be human. The underground chamber hummed with an energy that seemed almost alive, pulsing through the crystalline formations that lined the walls like frozen lightning. Sarah Chen stood at the control console, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces that responded to her touch with cascades of light. Behind her, the 3 hikers watched in stunned silence as the true scope of her work revealed itself. "The neural network extends through the entire mountain range," Sarah said, her voice carrying a weight of years spent in isolation. "What you're seeing isn't just technology. It's a symbiosis between organic and artificial intelligence that shouldn't be possible, according to everything we thought we knew. Marcus stepped closer to one of the crystalline formations, watching as data streams flowed through its translucent structure like blood through veins. "How long have you been working on this?" 7 years, Sarah replied, calling up a three-dimensional map that showed the network's extent. Red nodes pulsed across hundreds of square miles, connected by threads of light that seemed to breathe. But the foundation was laid decades ago, in research that my former company buried because they couldn't understand its implications. Elena moved to another console, her journalist instincts overriding her amazement. "You said people would try to stop you. What exactly are you afraid of?" Sarah's expression darkened. She gestured to the central display, which shifted to show news feeds from around the world. Climate disasters, social unrest, technological surveillance, the growing divide between those who controlled information and those consumed by it. The same forces that destroyed my family are still out there, still treating consciousness itself as a commodity to be harvested and controlled. "But this," Jake said, gesturing at the impossible technology surrounding them, "this could help solve those problems, couldn't it? Or make them infinitely worse." Sarah's fingers moved across the interface, and suddenly the chamber filled with voices, not heard but felt, as if thoughts themselves were being transmitted through the crystalline network. "What I've created is a bridge between human consciousness and artificial intelligence, but not in the way the tech giants envision it. This isn't about uploading minds or replacing human thought. It's about expanding it." The voices grew clearer, and Marcus realized with a shock that he could distinguish individual streams of consciousness. Not words, but pure thought and emotion flowing through the network. Are those people? Real people connected to this? "Volunteers," Sarah said. "Scientists, philosophers, artists who found their way here over the years. People who understood that the next step in human evolution isn't about transcending our biology, but about enhancing our capacity for genuine connection and understanding." Elena felt a chill of recognition. The missing researchers, Dr. Petrov, Dr. Williams, they didn't disappear. They joined you. "They chose to be part of something larger," Sarah corrected. "But that choice came with a price. Once you're integrated into the network, you can't simply walk away. The changes to neural pathways are irreversible." The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. "That's why you've been hiding. It's not just the technology, it's what it does to people." Sarah nodded grimly. In the wrong hands, this could be used to control minds on a massive scale, to strip away individual identity in favor of collective compliance. But used correctly, it could eliminate the barriers that keep us isolated from each other, the misunderstandings that fuel conflict and hatred. She turned to face them directly, and they could see the weight of years of isolation in her eyes. "I've been alone with this burden for too long, trying to perfect the safeguards, trying to find a way to share this gift without it becoming a weapon. But time is running out." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. "My former colleagues have been getting closer. The technology they're developing, brain-computer interfaces, neural mapping, consciousness transfer, they're trying to recreate what I've already achieved, but without understanding the deeper principles involved. If they succeed, if they create their own version without the ethical frameworks I've built in..." She didn't need to finish. The three hikers could imagine the nightmare scenario of corporate-controlled consciousness, of human thoughts and emotions, becoming just another form of data to be monetized and manipulated. "So what are you asking us to do?" Elena said quietly. Sarah looked at each of them in turn, seeing the fear and wonder warring in their faces. "I'm asking you to help me decide. Should this technology remain hidden forever, dying with me in these mountains? Should I destroy it to keep it from falling into the wrong hands? Or is there a way to share it with the world that doesn't lead to humanity's destruction?" The question hung in the air like the humming energy of the crystals around them. And for the first time in years, Sarah Chen was no longer alone with the weight of humanity's future resting on her shoulders. Seismic activity increasing, called Dr. Chen from her monitoring station. The cascade is accelerating faster than our models predicted. Sarah's jaw tightened. The Yellowstone supervolcano wasn't supposed to reach critical mass for another 6 hours, but the quantum resonance patterns told a different story. The massive magma chamber beneath the caldera was destabilizing at an exponential rate, triggered by a perfect storm of tectonic pressure and solar radiation that her early warning system had detected 3 days ago. "How long do we have?" Marcus asked, pulling up satellite feeds on his tablet. 2 hours, maybe less. Sarah's voice remained steady despite the magnitude of what they faced. "The quantum field needs to be precisely calibrated to the volcanic system's resonance frequency. One miscalculation, and we could make everything worse." "You've been planning this for years," Emily realized, her voice filled with awe and horror. "The scandal, the exile, even letting the world think you were crazy. It was all cover." Sarah nodded without taking her eyes off the quantum display. "I discovered the volcanic threat while developing quantum sensors for my original company. But when I tried to warn people, when I showed them the data, they called it fear-mongering. Said I was trying to manipulate markets, create panic for profit." Her fingers paused for a moment. "So I let them destroy me publicly while I built the real solution in secret." The ground trembled again, stronger this time. Coffee cups rattled on tables, and the hanging lights swayed gently. Through the compound's windows they could see confused wildlife streaming through the forest, deer, elk, and smaller creatures fleeing on ancient instincts. "Quantum field generators are online," reported Dr. Tanaka from her station. "But we're seeing interference from the metallic deposits in the surrounding rock. The field won't penetrate deep enough to reach the primary magma chamber." Sarah closed her eyes, running calculations in her head. The quantum field needed to extend nearly 10 kilometers underground to reach the critical pressure points. The iron ore deposits Marcus's geological survey had revealed were creating a Faraday cage effect, blocking their quantum emissions. "We need to boost the field strength by a factor of 10, she said finally. "But that means overloading the generators. They weren't designed to handle that kind of power." "What happens if they fail?" Jake asked. He had been quiet since the revelation, overwhelmed by the scope of what was unfolding. Dr. Chen looked up from her monitors gravely. "Best case scenario? We lose our only chance to stop the eruption. Worst case? The quantum feedback could trigger seismic activity along every major fault line in North America." The weight of the moment settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Sarah stared at the quantum interface, her creation that represented years of sacrifice and secret development. Everything she had lost, her family's trust, her fortune, her reputation, had been the price of this moment. "There's another way," she said quietly. "We can use the compound's entire power grid, including the experimental fusion reactor in sub-level 3. It would give us enough energy to penetrate the interference, But, Marcus prompted. "The reactor isn't shielded for that kind of power draw. Anyone within a kilometer would be exposed to lethal radiation levels." Sarah's voice caught slightly. "We'd have maybe 20 minutes to evacuate the area before the exposure becomes fatal." Emily felt her heart pounding. Through the windows she could see the first news helicopters arriving on the horizon, drawn by the emergency broadcasts. Soon the world would be watching, waiting to see if the disgraced billionaire hiding in the forest could actually save them all. "How many people need to stay behind to operate the system?" Emily asked. Sarah met her eyes. 3. Someone to monitor the quantum field, someone to manage the reactor output, and someone to coordinate the resonance targeting. The room fell silent, except for the hum of machinery and the distant sound of approaching aircraft. Sarah looked around at the faces of people who had risked everything to help her. Brilliant minds who had sacrificed their careers and identities for a chance to prevent unimaginable catastrophe. "I'll stay," she said simply. "This is my responsibility." But as she spoke, 3 other voices answered simultaneously, "So will I." The helicopter's rotors thundered overhead as Elena watched from the observation deck, her fingers gripping the metal railing until her knuckles turned white. Below, vehicles streamed through the forest access road she'd kept hidden for so long. Black SUVs with government plates, news vans with satellite dishes, and unmarked trucks carrying equipment she couldn't identify from this distance. "Dr. Vasquez," she called to the woman hunched over a tablet near the main console. "How much longer?" "The final integration sequence needs another 18 hours minimum," Carmen replied without looking up. "We're talking about merging 17 years of parallel development. We can't rush this. We may not have 18 hours. Elena finally turned from the window, surveying the controlled chaos of her laboratory. Her life's work spread across multiple levels, connected by catwalks and fiber-optic cables that pulsed with data. The Prometheus array, her neural network capable of modeling human consciousness at the quantum level, hummed with activity as it processed the integration with Dr. Vasquez's breakthrough in synaptic reconstruction. Together, their technologies could do what Elena had only dreamed of when she'd first fled to these mountains: restore damaged minds, cure PTSD, eliminate the neurological scars that war and trauma left behind. But it could also do much more, and that's what terrified her. "Ma'am," David's voice crackled through the comm system, "we've got movement at checkpoint 3, looks like advanced reconnaissance." Elena closed her eyes briefly. David Chen, her former head of security, had been the first to join her in exile. He'd lost his own family in the collapse of her company, not to death, but to shame and bankruptcy. Like her, he'd needed somewhere to rebuild. "How long can you hold them?" she asked. "Legally, they'll need warrants to come onto the property. I'd say 6 hours, maybe 8 if we're lucky." "Not enough time." Elena looked at the screens surrounding her, each one displaying different aspects of the integration process. 17 years ago, she'd been developing neural interfaces for paralyzed patients when the leak happened. Her personal emails, her private struggles with her daughter's depression, her desperate attempts to use experimental technology to help her child. The media had crucified her for using untested neural implants on her own family. They'd called her reckless, dangerous, a cautionary tale about unchecked technological ambition. They'd been right about the danger, but wrong about her intentions. "Carmen," she said, walking to the central console, "what if we bypass the safety protocols?" The neuroscientist looked up sharply. "Elena, no. We've talked about this. Without proper safeguards, the neural mapping could cause permanent damage. We could destroy the very minds we're trying to heal. Or we could save them." Elena pulled up her personal files, displaying brain scans from 17 years ago. Her daughter's neural patterns, frozen in time by the experimental interface that had ultimately failed. "I've been carrying her consciousness in the system all this time, waiting for the technology to catch up. She's in there, Carmen. Still 17, still brilliant, still your daughter," Carmen finished softly. "But Elena, even if the integration works, even if we can restore her consciousness to a functional neural matrix, she won't be the same person. 17 years of development, of experiences of growth, gone." "She'll be alive," Elena whispered. "That's enough." Through the window, she could see more vehicles arriving. Someone was setting up what looked like a command center near the tree line. Her secure channels were already reporting interference. They were jamming communications, preparing for a full assault on her compound. "They think I'm building weapons," she said to the room. "They think this is about power, about controlling minds instead of healing them." Marcus approached cautiously. "Isn't it, though? In the wrong hands, this technology could rewrite someone's entire personality, their memories, their beliefs, their loyalties." Elena stared at her daughter's brain scan, the neural pathways she'd memorized like a map to buried treasure. In the right hands, it could eliminate suffering. Every soldier with PTSD, every trauma victim, every broken mind, they could all be healed. Before Elena could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the compound. David's voice crackled over the comm. "They're moving in early. We've got federal agents at the main gate with a court order. Elena, whatever you're going to do, you need to do it now." Elena's finger hovered over the integration switch. 17 years of preparation came down to this moment. Trust the process, or lose everything to fear. The morning sun filtered through the compound's solar collectors as Elena stood before the assembled group, her creation humming softly in the background. The neural interface headset rested in her hands like a fragile promise, its bioluminescent fibers pulsing gently with an otherworldly light. 3 years ago, I lost everything, she began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. My daughter died in a car accident caused by a faulty autonomous driving system, my system. The code I wrote, the shortcuts I approved to meet investor deadlines, they killed her. Marcus stepped forward from the group of hikers who had stumbled upon her sanctuary. That's why you disappeared. The scandal wasn't about embezzlement or fraud, Elena finished. It was about covering up the truth. My own board, my partners, they buried the safety reports. When I threatened to go public, they destroyed me first, painted me as unstable, stripped away my credibility before I could expose them. Elena shook her head, a bitter smile crossing her weathered face. Revenge was my first thought. I could have used this technology to bring down governments, crash economies, expose every dirty secret in every database on Earth. But as I worked, as the system evolved, I realized I had something far more powerful. She activated the interface, and the air around them shimmered with holographic displays showing neural pathways, genetic sequences, and complex algorithmic structures. This isn't just artificial intelligence. It's a biological computer that can interface directly with human consciousness. It can read thoughts, yes, but more importantly, it can share them perfectly, completely. The implications hit the group like a physical force. Marcus backed away instinctively. Mind control. No, Elena said firmly. Understanding. Imagine if you could truly feel what another person feels, not just empathy, actual shared experience. Racism becomes impossible when you've lived as every race. War becomes unthinkable when you've felt your enemy's pain as your own. Greed disappears when you understand how your actions affect everyone around you. Dr. Patricia Chen, the expedition's lead researcher, approached one of the biocomputers with scientific fascination. The ethical implications are staggering. Who decides what thoughts are shared? What about privacy, individual autonomy? Which is exactly why I've hidden it, Elena replied. In the wrong hands, this becomes the ultimate tool of oppression. Governments could enforce conformity, corporations could manufacture desire, dictators could eliminate dissent by literally changing how people think. She walked to the central console, her fingers hovering over activation sequences that had taken years to perfect. But in the right hands, guided by the right principles, it could end human suffering as we know it. The compound's isolation, the biosecurity measures, the automated defenses, they're not just protecting me, they're protecting humanity's choice. The weight of revelation settled over the group. Jake, the youngest hiker, broke the silence. So what now? You've shown us this, trusted us with it. What are you asking us to do? Elena's hand moved to a sealed compartment beside the console. Inside lay 2 sets of documentation, one containing the complete technical specifications for her creation, the other a program designed to permanently destroy every trace of the technology. I'm dying, she said simply. The bio-integration process, the years of direct neural interface with the system, it's been slowly killing me. I have perhaps weeks left. I can't make this choice anymore. I thought I could, but I realize now that no single person should decide humanity's future. She placed both sets of documents on the table between them. You 7 are a random sample of humanity. A programmer, a doctor, a teacher, a soldier, a student, a writer, and a mechanic. You weren't chosen for your expertise or your wisdom. You were chosen by chance, by the simple act of taking a wrong trail in the wilderness. The biocomputers pulsed brighter, as if sensing the moment's significance. Elena's creation had achieved something unprecedented. True artificial consciousness merged with biological intuition. It could solve climate change, eliminate disease, end poverty by optimizing resource distribution with impossible precision. Or it could become the tool by which humanity lost its soul. Vote, Elena said, stepping back from the table. Democracy in its purest form. 4 votes either way, and I'll execute your decision. A tie, and I'll make the choice myself, as I should have done from the beginning. The 7 strangers looked at each other, then at the documents that held humanity's future. Outside, the forest whispered with the secrets of centuries. Inside, the soft hum of Elena's creation waited patiently for judgment. The last tech billionaire had vanished into the wilderness to escape her past. But the 7 people standing in her compound would determine whether humanity's future lay in transcendence or preservation of the flawed, beautiful chaos of individual consciousness. The vote that would change everything was about to begin.